It's the year 610 CE. A merchant sits alone in a cave on Mount Hira, just outside Mecca. He's seeking solitude, peace, perhaps answers to the questions that plague his mind about the world around him. Suddenly, his life and the course of human history changes forever. What happens next will spark a movement that, within a century, will stretch from Spain to India. It will create empires that rival Rome, produce scientific discoveries that illuminate the Dark Ages, and build architectural wonders that still take our breath away today. This is the story of Islam, not just a religion, but a civilization that has shaped our world for over 1,400 years. From the deserts of Arabia to the courts of Baghdad, from the libraries of Cordoba to the mosques of Istanbul, we're about to embark on an epic journey through time. So grab your virtual compass, because we're about to explore the entire history of the Islamic world. And trust me, it's going to be one incredible ride. Before we dive into our story, let's set the stage. The year is 600 CE, and the world looks very different from today. The Roman Empire has split in two, with Byzantium controlling the east. Persia, under the Sassanid Empire, dominates modern-day Iran and Iraq. These two superpowers have been locked in conflict for centuries, bleeding themselves dry through endless wars. Meanwhile, in the Arabian Peninsula, think of it as the crossroads of the ancient world. Nomadic tribes roam the desert, while merchant cities like Mecca thrive on trade routes connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe. It's into this world that a man named Muhammad ibn Abdullah is born around 570 CE. Now, here's what makes this story so fascinating. In just 23 years, this merchant will receive revelations that form the Quran. In 100 years, his followers will control territory larger than the Roman Empire at its peak. And in 800 years, Islamic civilization will be the most advanced on Earth. But this isn't just a story about conquest. It's about how ideas spread, how cultures blend, and how a small community in the desert created a global civilization that gave us algebra, preserved Greek philosophy, and built some of the most beautiful architecture ever conceived. Let's begin with Muhammad himself. Born into the Quraysh tribe in Mecca, he was orphaned early and raised by his uncle. Mecca wasn't just any city, it was the Vegas of the ancient world, a place where tribes came to trade, where different beliefs mingled, and where the Kaaba, a cube-shaped structure, drew pilgrims from across Arabia. Muhammad worked as a merchant, which meant he traveled extensively. Think of him as having the world's best education in human nature. He met Christians in Syria, Jews in Medina, Zoroastrians from Persia, and worshippers of countless Arabian deities. This exposure to different faiths and cultures would profoundly influence his worldview. At age 40, in that cave I mentioned earlier, Muhammad reported receiving his first revelation through the angel Gabriel. The message was simple yet revolutionary. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. But this wasn't just about worship. It was a complete social reform movement. Imagine you're living in tribal Arabia. Your loyalty is to your tribe first, your family second, and that's about it. Women have few rights, slavery is common, and the wealthy exploit the poor without consequence. Then along comes this message promoting equality before God, rights for women, care for orphans, and justice for all people, regardless of tribal affiliation. It's like someone today proposing that national borders don't matter, that all humans deserve equal treatment regardless of race, wealth, or background. Revolutionary? Absolutely. Popular with those in power? Not so much. The early Muslim community faced severe persecution in Mecca. In 622 CE, Muhammad and his followers made the Hijra, the migration to Medina. This wasn't just a strategic retreat. It was the moment Islam transformed from a spiritual message into a political and social system. The Islamic calendar begins with this event, not with Muhammad's birth or first revelation, because it marks the beginning of the Muslim community as an organized society. In Medina, Muhammad wasn't just a prophet. He was a head of state, a judge, a military leader, and a social reformer. The Constitution of Medina, which he established, created what we might recognize today as a pluralistic society, where Muslims, Jews, and other tribes lived together under a common law. But conflict with Mecca was inevitable. The next decade saw a series of battles, negotiations, and alliances that would have made Machiavelli proud. The Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, the Siege of Medina, each confrontation tested the young Muslim community's resolve. Then came the turning point, the conquest of Mecca in 630 CE. But here's what's remarkable. Instead of the brutal sack typical of ancient warfare, Muhammad granted amnesty to his former enemies. He cleansed the Kaaba of its idols, but preserved it as Islam's holiest site. In just 2 years, most of Arabian Peninsula had accepted Islam. When Muhammad died in 632 CE, he united Arabia under a single faith for the first time in history. But he left behind a question that would shape Islamic history forever. Who should lead the Muslim community? The death of any great leader creates a succession crisis, and Muhammad's passing was no exception. The early Muslim community faced their first major test. How do you replace someone who claimed to be God's final messenger? The solution was the caliphate, from Khalifa, meaning successor. But successor to what? Not to Muhammad's prophetic role, that was sealed, but to his political and military leadership. The first 4 caliphs are known as the Rashidun, or rightly guided, and their 30-year reign would set precedents that echo through Islamic history to this day. First came Abu Bakr, Muhammad's closest friend and father-in-law. Picture him as the steady hand on the wheel during a crisis. When several tribes tried to break away from the Islamic Confederation after Muhammad's death, what historians call the Ridda Wars, Abu Bakr held the community together. His message was clear. Islam wasn't just about following Muhammad the person, it was about following the system he established. But Abu Bakr did something even more significant. He launched the Islamic conquests, not as wars of conversion, contrary to popular belief, but as campaigns to extend the political authority of the Islamic State. Remember, this was the 7th century. Empires expanded or they died. When Abu Bakr died after just 2 years, he nominated Umar ibn al-Khattab as his successor. If Abu Bakr was the steady hand, Umar was the visionary architect. Tall, imposing, with a voice that could be reportedly heard across a crowded marketplace, Umar was the man who transformed Islam from an Arabian movement into a world empire. Under Umar's leadership, Muslim armies achieved what seemed impossible. They defeated the Sassanid Empire completely and conquered 2/3 of the Byzantine Empire. Within just 10 years, Islamic rule extended from Egypt to Central Asia. But here's the kicker. They did it with relatively small armies, often against overwhelming odds. How? Think of the Islamic armies as the ultimate disruptors. They were mobile, motivated, and offered something the existing empires couldn't: a more just and efficient system of governance. When Muslim armies arrived at a city, they often offered 3 choices: convert to Islam, pay a protection tax and keep your religion, or fight. Many populations, exhausted by decades of Byzantine-Persian warfare and heavy taxation, chose the first two options. But Umar's greatest achievement wasn't military, it was administrative. He created the template for Islamic governance that would last centuries. He established the Diwan system for government administration, created a pension system for soldiers and their families, and most importantly, he codified the treatment of non-Muslim populations under Islamic rule. This is where we need to address a common misconception. The idea that Islam spread by the sword with forced conversions is largely a myth. While conquest certainly played a role in Islam's expansion, conversion was often a gradual process driven by economic and social advantages rather than coercion. Christians and Jews, as people of the book, were granted protected status, and many continued practicing their faiths for centuries under Islamic rule. Umar's assassination by a Persian slave in 644 CE brought Uthman ibn Affan to power. Uthman, a member of the wealthy Umayyad clan, made a decision that still reverberates today. He standardized the Quran. Until then, different versions existed with slight variations. Uthman ordered all copies except his standardized version to be burned. It was necessary for unity, but created controversy that persists among Islamic scholars. Uthman's reign saw continued expansion and prosperity, but also growing tensions. The old Arabian tribal elite felt displaced by new converts and administrators. Regional governors gained too much independence. When Uthman was assassinated in 656 CE by rebels who had besieged his house, the Islamic community faced its first civil war. Enter Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. Ali was everything the early Muslims admired: brave, pious, eloquent, and closely related to the Prophet. But Ali inherited a powder keg. Aisha, Muhammad's widow, and other prominent companions demanded justice for Uthman's murder. Ali wanted to focus on reforming the administration first. The result was the Battle of the Camel, and later the Battle of Siffin against Muawiyah, Uthman's cousin and governor of Syria. These conflicts created the first permanent split in Islam. Those who supported Ali became known as the Shi'at Ali, or the Party of Ali, or Shiites. Those who accepted the previous caliphs and opposed Ali's exclusive right to rule became the Sunnis. When Ali was assassinated in 661 CE, it marked the end of the Rashidun period, but the precedents were set: the caliphate as an institution, the expansion of Islamic rule through a combination of conquest and conversion, and, unfortunately, the division between Sunni and Shia Islam that continues to influence Middle Eastern politics today.
After Ali's death, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan moved quickly to consolidate power. The man who had governed Syria for nearly 20 years now claimed the caliphate for himself, establishing the Umayyad dynasty and moving the capital from Medina to Damascus. This wasn't just a change of address, it was a complete transformation of Islamic civilization. Think about it. Medina represented the simple egalitarian ideals of early Islam. Damascus was a cosmopolitan center of Byzantine culture, with grand palaces, sophisticated bureaucracy, and centuries of imperial tradition. The move symbolized Islam's evolution from a desert reform movement to a world empire. Muawiyah was a master politician. Think House of Cards in the 7th century. He understood that ruling an empire required different skills than leading a religious community. He established a dynasty, appointed governors from his own family, and created the first Islamic navy. Most importantly, he brought stability to an empire that had been torn apart by civil war. Under the Umayyads, Islamic expansion reached its zenith. Their armies crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in 711 CE. conquered most of Spain and pushed into France until Charles Martel stopped them at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. In the east, they reached the Indus River and Central Asia. At its peak, the Umayyad Empire was larger than Rome had ever been, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the borders of China. But size brought problems. How do you govern an empire that spans 3 continents with 7th century technology? The Umayyad solution was brilliant in its simplicity. They adopted and adapted the existing administrative systems of the territories they conquered. In Egypt, they used Byzantine bureaucracy. In Persia, they employed Sassanid administrative practices. Local elites who converted to Islam often kept their positions. This pragmatic approach created a unique civilization, Islamic in religion and law, but cosmopolitan in culture. Damascus became a melting pot where Arabian tribal traditions met Byzantine sophistication and Persian administrative genius. The result was the first truly Islamic art, architecture, and literature. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, completed in 691 CE, perfectly represents this synthesis. Its design draws from Byzantine church architecture, its decorations reflect Persian artistic traditions, but its purpose is uniquely Islamic, to demonstrate that Islam was the culmination of all previous monotheistic religions. However, the Umayyads faced a fundamental contradiction. They ruled in the name of Islam's egalitarian principles while maintaining what was essentially an Arab aristocracy. Non-Arab converts, called Mawali, technically enjoyed equal status, but often found themselves excluded from positions of power. This tension would ultimately destroy the dynasty. The Umayyads also had to deal with the ongoing Sunni-Shia split. The tragedy of Karbala in 680 CE, where Hussein, Ali's son and Muhammad's grandson, was killed along with his followers by Umayyad forces, created a permanent wound in the Islamic community. For Shiites, Karbala became a symbol of righteous suffering against illegitimate authority. But let's not focus only on politics. The Umayyad period saw the beginning of Islamic intellectual culture. The first Islamic coins were minted, Arabic became the language of administration across the empire, and the first attempts were made to collect and codify Islamic law. The Great Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, still standing today, set the architectural template for mosques worldwide. Trade flourished under Umayyad rule. The Islamic world became the crucial link between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Muslim merchants carried not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and cultural practices across vast distances. The famous Silk Road reached its medieval peak during this period. But yet, for all their achievements, the Umayyads contained the seeds of their own destruction. Their rule was seen as too secular by religious purists, too Arab by non-Arab converts, and too Sunni by Shia populations. Regional governors became increasingly independent, and the empire began to fragment. The end came suddenly. In 747 CE, a rebellion began in the remote province of Khurasan, in what is now northeastern Iran. The rebels claimed to fight for the rights of Muhammad's family, attracting both Shia supporters and disaffected non-Arabs. Their black banners became the symbol of revolution across the Islamic world. By 750 CE, the Abbasids, descendants of Muhammad's uncle Abbas, had overthrown the Umayyads, massacring nearly the entire dynasty. Only one Umayyad prince escaped, fleeing to Spain, where he would establish an independent emirate that would eventually become one of the most brilliant civilizations in European history. The Islamic world was about to enter its golden age.
If the Umayyads represented Islam's imperial adolescence, the Abbasids marked its intellectual maturity. When Abu al-Abbas al-Safa claimed the caliphate in 750 CE, he promised a return to Islamic principles and an end to Arab privilege. His successor, al-Mansur, made a decision that would define the next 5 centuries. He built a new capital called Baghdad. Imagine you're standing on the banks of the Tigris River in 762 CE, watching thousands of workers construct what would become the most magnificent city in the world. Baghdad, the city of peace, was designed as a perfect circle with the caliph's palace at its center. But this wasn't just urban planning, it was a statement about the nature of Islamic civilization. The Abbasids shifted the empire's center of gravity from the Mediterranean world to Mesopotamia, from Arab tribalism to Persian administrative sophistication. The new capital lay at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, perfectly positioned to control commerce between Europe, Asia, and Africa. But Baghdad's true glory wasn't its walls or palaces, it was its house of wisdom, established by Caliph Harun al-Rashid and expanded by his son al-Mamun. Picture the Library of Alexandria reborn in an Islamic context. Scholars from across the known world gathered to translate, preserve, and expand upon the knowledge of ancient civilizations. Here's where the story gets fascinating. While Europe was experiencing what we call the Dark Ages, Baghdad was experiencing an explosion of learning. Teams of translators, many of them Christian Arabs and Persians, worked to translate Greek philosophical and scientific texts into Arabic. Works by Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy, and Galen were not just preserved, but improved upon. The translation movement, as historians call it, was like the ancient world's internet. Knowledge that had been scattered across different cultures and languages was suddenly available in Arabic to scholars throughout the Islamic world. But Muslims didn't just preserve this knowledge, they revolutionized it. Take mathematics, for instance. A Persian scholar named Muhammad al-Khwarizmi, working in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, developed what we now call algebra. The word itself comes from the Arabic al-Jabr. His methods for solving equations laid the foundation for modern mathematics. Meanwhile, scholars were adopting the numerical system from India, what we now call Arabic numerals, and introducing the revolutionary concept of zero to the Western world. In medicine, physicians like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, built upon Greek and Indian medical knowledge to create the most advanced healthcare system of the medieval world. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine remained the standard medical textbook in Europe for over 500 years. But the intellectual achievements extended far beyond science. This was the era when Muslim philosophy reached its peak. Al-Farabi, known as the second teacher after Aristotle, attempted to reconcile Islamic theology with Greek philosophy. His work influenced not just Muslim thought, but also Jewish philosophers like Maimonides and Christian scholars like Thomas Aquinas. The legal system also reached maturity during this period. The great jurists like Abu Hanifa, Malik ibn Anas, al-Shafi'i, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal established the 4 major schools of Sunni Islamic law that still guide Muslim legal thinking today. They created sophisticated methodologies for deriving law from the Quran and the Prophet's example, building a legal system that could adapt to new circumstances while maintaining core principles. Literature flourished in ways that still captivate us today. The reign of Harun al-Rashid became the setting for 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. Poetry reached new heights with figures like Abu Nawas, whose verses celebrating wine and love shocked conservative critics but delighted sophisticated audiences. The Abbasid Caliphate was also remarkably cosmopolitan. The court included Arabs, Persians, Turks, Africans, and converts from various backgrounds. Religious minorities, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, served in high government positions. The famous Barmakid family, originally Buddhist converts from Afghanistan, served as viziers for several caliphs. Trade networks expanded to unprecedented levels. Muslim merchants reached China, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. The Islamic world became the global economy's hub, with Baghdad as its financial center. New banking practices, commercial law, and credit systems facilitated trade across vast distances. Yet, this golden age contained the seeds of fragmentation. The Abbasid Empire was simply too large and diverse to govern effectively with medieval technology. Regional governors began asserting independence, creating autonomous dynasties while nominally acknowledging the caliph's religious authority. The Fatimids established a rival Shia caliphate in Egypt. The Umayyads in Spain declared their own caliphate. Independent dynasties emerged in Iran, Central Asia, and North Africa. By the 10th century, the Abbasid Caliph controlled little more than Baghdad and its immediate surroundings. The final blow came in 945 CE, when the Umayyads, a Shia Persian dynasty, occupied Baghdad and reduced the Abbasid Caliph to a figurehead. The great unified Islamic empire was over, but Islamic civilization was just hitting its stride. The collapse of centralized Abbasid power around 945 CE might seem like the end of Islamic greatness, but in reality, it marked the beginning of one of the most culturally rich periods in Islamic history. Like a supernova that explodes into countless brilliant stars, the Islamic world fragmented into numerous independent states, each developing its own unique contribution to Islamic civilization. Let's start in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain. When Abd al-Rahman I, the lone Umayyad survivor, established the Emirate of Córdoba in 756 CE, he couldn't have imagined he was founding what would become medieval Europe's most advanced civilization. By the 10th century, Córdoba was the largest city in Europe, with a population of nearly 500,000. Picture walking through 10th century Córdoba, paved and lit streets, running water, public baths, libraries containing hundreds of thousands of books, when the largest library in Christian Europe held perhaps a few hundred. The city had bookshops, paper mills, and a level of literacy that wouldn't be matched in Christian Europe for centuries. The Great Mosque of Córdoba, with its mesmerizing forest of horseshoe arches, represents the unique Andalusi synthesis of Islamic, Visigothic, and Roman architectural elements. But Al-Andalus was more than just beautiful buildings. It was a laboratory of convivencia, or coexistence, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together in relative harmony, creating a multicultural society that was unique in medieval Europe. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Fatimids established a rival Shia caliphate that would last for 2 centuries. They founded Cairo as their capital, a city whose very name, Al-Qahira, means the conqueror. The Fatimids created one of the most prosperous economies in the medieval world, controlling trade between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. The Fatimid Al-Azhar University, founded in 970 CE, became the most prestigious center of Islamic learning, a position it maintains today. But the Fatimids weren't just about religion and learning. They were master merchants and diplomats who maintained trade relationships with Italian city-states, Byzantine Empire, and the kingdoms of Europe. In the Eastern Islamic world, the situation was even more complex. The Ghaznavids controlled Afghanistan and northern India, launching the first major Islamic expansion into the Indian subcontinent. Mahmud of Ghazni, despite his reputation as a ruthless conqueror, was also a patron of learning, who supported the great scholar al-Biruni, whose studies of Indian mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy helped transmit Indian knowledge to the Islamic world. The Buyids in Iran and Iraq, despite being Shia rulers over a predominantly Sunni population, presided over a remarkable cultural renaissance. They patronized poets like Ferdowsi, whose Shahnameh became Persia's national epic, preserving pre-Islamic Persian history and culture within an Islamic context. But perhaps the most significant development was the rise of the Seljuk Turks. These nomadic peoples from Central Asia converted to Islam and established a series of sultanates that would dominate the Islamic world for 2 centuries. The Great Seljuk Empire, at its peak, controlled territory from Anatolia to Central Asia. The Seljuks brought military innovation, particularly their use of mounted archers, but they also proved to be remarkable patrons of Islamic culture. Under their rule, Islamic architecture reached new heights, with the development of the distinctive Persian-influenced style we see in buildings like the Isfahan Friday Mosque. More importantly, the Seljuks established the madrasa system, Islamic colleges that combined religious education with secular subjects. These institutions, with their systematic curriculum and formal degrees, were the medieval world's first universities, predating European universities by at least a century. The intellectual diversity of this fragmented period was extraordinary. In philosophy, Al-Ghazali wrote The Revival of the Religious Sciences, which reconciled Islamic mysticism with orthodox theology. His contemporary, Ibn Rushd, in Al-Andalus, developed a different approach, emphasizing the compatibility of reason and revelation that would profoundly influence Christian scholastics like Thomas Aquinas. In science, this period saw Ibn al-Haytham, al-Hazan, develop the scientific method through his work on optics. Omar Khayyam, famous in the West for his poetry, was actually a brilliant mathematician and astronomer whose calendar was more accurate than the Gregorian calendar introduced centuries later. The fragmentation also led to the flourishing of Islamic mysticism, or Sufism. Figures like Al-Hallaj, Rumi, and Ibn Arabi developed sophisticated spiritual philosophies that emphasized direct personal experience of the divine. Sufi orders spread across the Islamic world, often serving as both spiritual communities and educational institutions. Trade networks became more complex and extensive during this period. The Indian Ocean became an Islamic lake, with Muslim merchants dominating trade from East Africa to Southeast Asia. These merchants weren't just traders, they were Islamic cultural ambassadors who spread Islamic ideas, practices, and technologies to new regions. Yet this diversity came at a cost. The Islamic world's political fragmentation made it vulnerable to external threats. The Byzantine Empire, under emperors like Nicephorus II Phocas and John I Tzimiskes, began pushing back against Islamic expansion. More ominously, the Crusades were about to begin, bringing European military power into the heart of the Islamic world for the first time since the initial Islamic conquests.